I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. All right, what's up, world? Welcome to another edition of I Mix What I Like Live. Again, I'm Jared Ball, happy to be your host. Thank you very much for joining me, whether you are watching this live or in the replay. We appreciate you. Please make sure you are subscribed and signed up at blackpowermedia.org, blackpowermedia.org, and following at blackpowermedi1. That is Black Power MEDI, the number 1. Follow that on Twitter as well, and make sure that you don't miss a lot of what's going on. We have an expanding and ever-growing project with more exciting news coming up shortly. The morning show is going to launch soon. We have, of course, Lukman Nation coming up live Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern. Plus drops here and there in between. Of course, we have The Last Dope Intellectual with Dr. Sharice Burden-Stelly, following that up 7 p.m. live on Friday. Well, not live, but it premieres. The show, that is, will premiere Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Of course, much more being posted almost daily by the Renegade Culture crew. So definitely please check that out at the Black Power Media channel. And then, I Mix What I Like is doing its thing as well. We've had a lot of really good conversations lately, and some more, of course, coming up, including in just a few minutes. So please make sure you're all signed up everywhere and do all the stuff that needs to happen. Like, share, subscribe. I was looking at the analytics the other day, and we're still somewhere around, I want to say we're only at less than 50% who watch subscribe to the channel, if I remember correctly. And of course, less than that have actually become members, which we understand, obviously, nobody has a lot of money, but membership is only $4.99 a month, and it supports a lot of expansion and more that's coming. So please consider doing that as well. And also, whether you become a member at the channel, or if you want to support differently, we also would happily accept your support financially through the Patreon at blackpowermedia.org. If for no other reason, the way the analytics work here at YouTube, a lot of our videos get throttled. Number one, we already understand that just politically, we're not going to get pushed into that top corporate tier of promotion. And the way the ad revenue works, yes, we acknowledge the contradiction of being anti-capitalist while looking to take ad revenue from a very capitalist YouTube Google venture. The analytics almost do a favor by balancing that out by, again, putting us either in the not eligible category or in the slow lane, because it's all based on what ad buyers, as is the point of my buying power book, by the way, which you can get for free at imixwhatilike.org. It's all at the whim of the ad buyers. So obviously a lot of our content is not going to be, quote, seen as, quote, suitable to ad buyers. So we're not going to generate as much revenue from those ads. So that contradiction is at least balanced out. Therefore, also putting more in terms of our ability to expand financially on your direct support. Beyond that, if you pay attention at all to what's happening in the media space, whether on YouTube or elsewhere, a lot of even white progressive and what would be called white progressive and leftist outlets are being shut down, put on temporary holds from going live or raising money. So obviously politically, we might see where this could be heading for us. So for us to be able to sustain ourselves and grow, the ability to have a support base and a revenue base outside of this channel is important, hence the blackpowermedia.org Patreon, all of which you can find at blackpowermedia.org. So, by the way, speaking of I did just shamelessly mention my book, the Myth of Black Buying Power, as the last checked, has just in terms of the free digital downloads, not even talking about actual sales of the book or even necessarily the full download, full copy downloads of the book, since it is broken up by chapters, has generated over 56,000 downloads. So each chapter is getting almost 8,000 downloads so far of just the free digital version, not again to mention whatever is being sold in the hard copy. So, and yet only 2 reviews have come out. One written by Black Alliance for Peace member and Black Agenda Report contributor Margaret Kimberly, and another written by Nino Brown for the Party for Socialism and Liberation, which I just put at imixwhatilike.org, and a link to their Liberation School where it originally was published. And it's a very interesting, I think, great review actually, but it's interesting in the way that's carried out. But my point is, for all the discussion that's been generated, there hasn't been there's been no reviews, no public critical refutation. Quite the opposite, in fact. But anyway, it's all part of what I think we're trying to deal with at this channel here, making room for arguments that are not seen acceptable in other spaces. So anyway, speaking of which, obviously a lot of work going on in the country around issues of police violence, and particularly the Black community's relationship to police. And so we want to continue to highlight that work, whether it's dealing with the political prisoners that we talk about and interview all the time, or dealing with those in other aspects of the community trying to find ways of addressing themselves to this problem. And one of those folks I saw not long ago on Breakthrough News with Eugene Puryear. Shout out to Eugene. And by the way, if you didn't see Eugene doing his thing and our Alive Reinvention contributors roundtable, you got to go check that out. Eugene not only crushed it in that, but the revelations, if you missed it, I don't know if people caught that, the revelations around, I mean, we make somewhat fun of it, but I really appreciate that Paul Coates acknowledged the not the controversy, I'm making fun, exaggerating there, between, his own son not being able, his own world famous son not having an essay that we found fit the intent of the project. That's discussed. Even more interesting to me is when Baba Zach Kondo breaks down his involvement in the Who Killed Malcolm X documentary from Netflix, and clarifies some, a lot around that. Anyway, and a lot more in that 2-hour plus conversation. So please check that out. Anyway, but here right now is in part because of Eugene's positive intervention and putting us together. And I really appreciate that, because when I saw this brother talking on Breakthrough News, I was like, wow, he's not only here in Maryland, but he's doing the kind of work that we need to support. He put me in touch with his brother, Larry Stafford Jr. is his name. Who was going to join us in just a minute, and who began his career in public service at the age of 17 with the Association of Community Organizations for Reform Now, formerly known as ACORN. Maybe we can talk about that, because what was done to that organization is a travesty as well. Where he fought against the closure of low-income apartment complexes in some of the most marginalized community within Prince George's County, which is, again, a county here in Maryland that is supposed to be the richest Black community, maybe even in the world. But as we talked about with Jonathan Hutto in the video, you should also go see, there is no Black power in maybe the world's richest Black community. But Stafford Jr. has since worked on numerous electoral and issue-based campaigns around the country. He became executive director of Progressive Maryland in 2015, where he continues to grow the organization as the premier progressive force in the state, working to build power for working families. And Larry joins us here specifically to talk about his work around the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights, or LEOBOR. And what that is, what it means, and what he and his organization mean to do about it. So Larry, welcome. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. It's good to see you.
Thank you for having me. As I said, it's an honor to be on here after seeing so many of your talks and reading a bit of your book on the myth of Black buying power, which I've been trying to push everywhere I can in Prince George's County, because this is one of the number one places where this myth is propagated. So yeah, I
appreciate that, and
that too.
and one day we'll also have to, in fact, we're going to have to bring you back again, because you and Jonathan and others who work in the county, because a paper that I had the pleasure of contributing to, I think is going to drop tomorrow, on the condition of Black businesses, and PG comes up because again, that contradiction of there being, relative to the rest of the country, this base of Black income, even some wealth, even some home ownership, even some Black-owned businesses, but anyway, there's some interesting details as to why that hasn't been able to be turned into some more expansive income and wealth, and why it's not something that can be duplicated anywhere else in the country. That has to do with the sectors of businesses and the income of the community. But anyway, so it's pretty interesting. But since PG is often considered to be this, Black utopia of sorts, I think you're here to talk about some of the reasons why it's not. So let's get to that. First of all, talk about Progressive Maryland, what you all do beyond what I read in the intro, and then talk a little bit about this law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights and the way you all are trying to get people involved in dealing with that.
Yeah, so first and foremost about Progressive Maryland. So we're a community-based political organization. We work to organize people and communities across the state of Maryland. That includes places like where I'm from here in Prince George's County, as well as places as far as the Eastern Shore from me, where I'm hoping to be going out there in a couple of weeks now to meet with some of our members there. So we combine membership and experiences in the rural parts of Maryland, the suburban parts of Maryland, and even in Baltimore City as well, to bring together a working class base of people to address the structural and systemic problems that our people face in this state and in this country. So we're about building working class power with Black people at the center of it, and brown folks as well. We're a multiracial organization also. And our goal is to take power in the state of Maryland, power away from the ruling class of the corporate and business interests that have dominated politics in the state for so long. And we want to ultimately govern here locally at the local and state level. So we're a political organization. We endorse candidates. We train people to run for office, but we don't see that as the ultimate and only path to freedom, liberation, and transforming these systems. We also recognize that we have to continue to organize and lift up a base of leaders who will take direct action and confront the system wherever it's at as well. So that's a little bit more than we got to put that on the website perhaps as well, because clip that
right there and put that. Just and maybe I'll do that. I'll clip it for you and send it to you. You could use.
I feel like I broke it down a little better than we wrote it.
Yeah, that's what's up. Yeah. So what's up? Like I even put in the head, for the promo for this discussion. What's up with this law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights? What is it, and what does Progressive Maryland want to do about it? How does it function? What is the issue? What's up with it?
Yeah, so the law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights is one of the most oppressive measures that the state has as it relates to favoring the interest and protecting police officers when it comes to their interactions with people in the community. So it's a Bill of Rights, a special Bill of Rights that was created, I believe, in the 1970s in that era to protect law enforcement. Maryland was the first state in the country to actually implement this type of policy. And since being created in Maryland, it's now been implemented in 16 states across the country as well, including in Kentucky and Minnesota, where you had the cases around George Floyd and Breonna Taylor come up to recent memory. And it's almost like a collective bargaining agreement for the police codified into actual statute, into the law itself. So some of the things the law enforcement officers Bill of Rights does is that it creates a system in which when police are to be disciplined, they can go before a internal hearing board instead of even having to face discipline by the chief. They get to have a certain number of days before they are questioned after they have an incident. So it gives the police an advantage when it comes to them actually being held accountable. It also names one of the primary things that we have a problem with is that it creates a system where only law enforcement can investigate other law enforcement. So you have the police holding themselves accountable instead of the community actually being able to have real oversight and power when it comes to disciplining these folks when they act wild in our communities.
That's a euphemism if I've ever heard it. Act wild. That's a polite way of, but okay. So just so I'm clear, and so for instance, my students are clear, and anyone else who watches this is clear. The Leobor is not a national, or is not currently yet a nationally adopted policy.
Oh God, no! I hope not. I hope never.
Right. But clearly, I'm assuming. Well, maybe not. Let me just ask: to what extent is the Fraternal Order Police nationally pushing for its expansion, or are they not involved in this, or is there another group involved in trying to expand it beyond the 16 states?
Well, I'm assuming the Fraternal Order of Police, like, this is one of their crowning achievements. I'm sure they would love to have this type of policy implemented in even more states than just the 16. So I wouldn't be aware of what their exact plans are, but right now it's implemented in a host of specific states, including California, Delaware, Florida, and other states as well. But I don't know if and I hope there's no prospects for it being implemented across the country.
Well, I just know that, when we talk to people, certainly like Daruba bin Wahad and others, they point to the specific powerful role that the police unions play in pushing these kinds of legislative measures that protect the police. And that's where I want to double back also. So just to again be clear, the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights also it protects police. So those who want community control over the police, this is a barrier to that.
Exactly.
People who want to be able to hold police accountable for what they do, this is a barrier to that because it insulates them. It sounds like you're saying almost doubly, because not only are they insulated from the public, but they're also insulated from even circles within their own operation.
Yeah, the chiefs,
didn't I hear you? Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, the chiefs are often some of the folks that are in favor to changes to the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights because they feel even in their capacities, it creates barriers for them to discipline. And of course, the police chiefs are no friends to us as the police are usually no friends to us either. And they even have problems with provisions in this because they can't even hold officers accountable in ways that they want to.
Which also sounds like another level of insulation from the public because theoretically people think that they can address themselves to the chief of police. And if he or she can't even involve themselves in these processes, then it's even more vague in terms of how people would address themselves to the institution of the police to get the stuff dealt with, if I'm hearing that correctly.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct on that. People think that they can just go to the chief or file the complaint within the department. But in Maryland, you don't even have any right to know what the result of your complaint was. In my own experience with police brutality, where officers threatened to take my life and abuse me when I was a young kid, I remember my mother calling up to the police station, filing complaints, trying to do something to, get them to act. And, you call back up there, like they can, in that case, at least they ignored us for the most part. So it's like this own institution where they're just like outside of a lot of public scrutiny. It's just its own world. where they can just act however they please.
And can talk a little bit, if you can, about when you use the euphemism of act wild in Black communities. What is the experience of Black communities in Maryland that Progressive Maryland as an organization is dealing with? Maryland, I don't think nationally is one of the more prominently discussed nations. Not a lot that happens here captures, I think, I don't know, but
yeah.
And again, the projection is often that PG is this Black utopia of sorts.
And that's absolutely not the case. In Prince George's, you have some African Americans that are able to live in some nice, what they call McMansions, right? And get to live in a suburban kind of community, for instance. But, Prince George's, as you know, I know that has its own history with police brutality, and in fact, had to have the Justice Department step in to try to reform some things within the Prince George's police department. And I'm still just getting some of the details of this today, but in fact, there was a report, now unredacted, released on discrimination and racial issues within the department in Prince George's County. So when it comes to acting wild, so when we think about police and what goes wrong with policing in this country, oftentimes rightfully so, the first thing that comes up is, of course, their murder and their brutality that they put on into our communities, right? Like how they beat us and brutalize us and kill way too many of us. But that's just one part of the ways that they act wild, in a sense, in that euphemistic sense, from like corruption and arrest. And like, so I always say it like this, in some cases, to take somebody's life, you don't even have to necessarily kill them. They've been taking lives from people, planting drugs on folks in our community, arresting people, trying to overcharge them, along with the prosecutors that play hand in hand with this, brutalizing. And in some cases, I remember getting a lot of memories from my youth these days, but I remember coming home and the police would deliberately stop young women on their walk from school, from high school, I was in, so teenage young women, and say that they were searching them and use that as an excuse to touch on their bodies, right? So police have been getting away with a lot more than even just murder for a long time. And when people try to deal with this by filing a complaint, deal with this by, reaching through the political process, they have several layers of protection that keep them from like seeing any consequence to much of this stuff.
And if in terms of just the state of Maryland, if anybody needs more than that, just Google the Baltimore's Gun Trace Task Force, and you can read more than you probably can handle of what just even what's publicly now known about what they've been up to. I mean, it is just, again, to your point, beyond just the killing, which is bad enough. I mean, yeah. It's the support of drug trade. It's the planting of drugs, the planting of arms, the setting people up for court cases. I mean, it's all kinds of ways people's lives are destroyed beyond just the physical. Anyway.
Yeah.
So just quickly, what other, because I want to come back to this, but what other issues is Progressive Maryland most addressing itself to? And then, actually, let me back up quickly. What is it that you would like to see more people do to support your work as it relates to the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights? What kinds of actions are you all advocating, and would you like more support or involvement?
Well, we're going to have to really get mobilized in this critical time period around the Maryland legislative session. So just last Friday, so let me back up a second. So the because as a result of the movement energy and the people's outrage and rebellion over the past summer in 2020, there's been more of an opening to create the conditions, at least for reform, at least modest reform, and in some cases, a little bit more transformational reform, especially in the case with the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights. You had the Speaker and the Senate President come out in favor of repealing the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights, all of which we were very excited about that chance, because we've been going back for a couple of years now, initially just trying to get some modifications to this legislation to make it less of a problem for our communities. But now the repeal came to be on the table. However, just last Friday, the repeal legislation that Senator Jill Carter sponsored was amended drastically in the Judicial Proceedings Committee, where you had a senator, a former officer from Prince George's County, Senator Michael Jackson, added a host of amendments that make this repeal look more like a reinstatement of the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights. Particularly, the thing we're most concerned about is stripping out the language that would allow civilian oversight and accountability. So we're going to have to apply pressure. Go ahead.
I just want you to break that down a little bit more, if you could. Because and for those who aren't aware, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but from my perspective and from the outside, is that Delegate Carter is seen as more or less, relatively speaking, the people's champion, right?
Yeah.
I mean, she in those spaces, she's seen as doing the most that could possibly be done.
Yeah, for sure.
But she's also often struggling against her own party.
Yep.
To make advances, which is another conversation. But clarify again, what is it that what did she propose, and then what was added on to make it not what she's trying to get done? Because help me out with that.
Yeah. So Senator Carter proposed the complete repeal of the law.
Senator Carter, sorry, I didn't. Yeah, sorry, I
mislabeled
her. Sorry about that.
A delegate, whatever. But she proposed the repeal of the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights, something that we celebrated her having a chance to get rid of.
Just a straight repeal.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Like with some language about, making sure that certain provisions allow for like basic worker standards that are afforded to any other state or county employee.
Right.
But a repeal nonetheless in terms of some of the policies that get in the way of accountability. However,
so they would just be treated like any other municipal worker, like the garbage collectors and whoever else. They just wouldn't have this additional protective Bill of Rights.
Yeah, especially as it relates to when they're accused of wrongdoing with our people. So her policy was good, and we've supported it. However, now the senator from Prince George's, Michael Jackson, former sheriff for Prince George's County, he proposed a host of changes to her policy. Some of the most concerning among them, and he partnered with Senator Jeff Wallstreicher, and it was in a conspiracy, I would say, also with another African-American senator, unfortunately, Senator Will Smith in Montgomery County, to strip out the language that would allow for civilian oversight boards to be able to have some of the discipline powers that the chief previously would be able to exercise. That would have been a step towards more of a transformation, more community control of police, or at least an opening for that kind of policy to happen in local jurisdictions. But they stripped that language out. They also put back in language around police being able to appeal and say that instead of facing discipline by the chief, they could go before a trial board. And the trial boards are this internal mechanism, which not any type of public process, where officers get to judge other officers, essentially. And so those two particular provisions take away much of the meaning behind saying we're repealing the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. And so as far as action that people can get into now, we're going to be putting out a call to action very soon, as far as taking some direct action, perhaps to the streets as well. But for now, like, if people can reach out to their local state senators, their local state delegates, and say, we need real civilian, like, in general, like the power of the public to be able to hold police accountable. Civilian oversight panels are often toothless when it comes to actual discipline. They're limited in what they can investigate, and they're limited in actually being able to have disciplining powers. We need that back in this bill, and folks can write their senator, call them in Annapolis, call their local representative, but soon we're going to have to show up in some people's faces. And I know it's a pandemic, but it seemed like they were only listening when folks were out in the streets marching, causing a disruption to the order of business. So we may have to get back to that very soon.
Absolutely. And I just, I've been telling all the activists we talk to, just as you go forward, please add what we're doing here to your media outreach list.
Yep.
And we're happy to accommodate when possible. Certainly, just hit us up. And first, I'll make sure you have my cell number. Hit us up. And if we can't be there live, maybe we can help stream live what you're doing. I mean, we'll support the work is what I'm saying.
I will reach out. And the other thing people could do is join Progressive Maryland. We're an organization. We believe that we need mass movement and folks in the streets ready to mobilize, but we also need organization. Something that, the Honorable Chairman Fred Hampton and Kwame Ture talked about is that organization is what lasts beyond these flare-ups. So we would love for folks to join our organization as well as the other organizations that are engaging in this fight.
Absolutely. Just quickly before I ask you this about this class project thing, what other projects are you all working on that we may need to know about or should know about? What other issues is Progressive Maryland?
Yeah, so there's a host of things. I'll try to narrow down to maybe 2 or 3, right? So as far as other policies that we're working to advance, ending the war on drugs is a major one. It's more specifically, we're fighting for marijuana legalization, but not just marijuana legalization that allows, more wealthy white folks to come into the state and become even more wealthy, but kind of legalization that also repairs some of the past harms from the drug war, allows people to expunge their records and make sure that Black folks and the people who have been most harmed by the war on drugs can benefit from the newly created economy, the newly legalized economy, at least, and that we should be the chief folks that reap the benefit from legalization on the economic side. And we should have local control and power over what happens with the funding if there to be any money collected called reparations for the war on drugs. So we also want that money to go into our communities, the tax revenues, but we should have a say-so on what takes place with that money. So that's one piece. And then we just launched our candidate training program, our cohort for 2021. So the application is up on our website. I'll try to get it to you so you can get out to your people, because we're looking for more radically minded, transformational candidates who are willing to go into, the danger zone of interacting with this institution of the state government to fight like a Senator Joe Carter. Senator Carter needs more allies, frankly, in the state Senate to fight alongside her, as do other leftists and progressives or at the state level. And we're looking to build that bench. So those would be just the two things I mentioned, unless you want me to spot off with a third.
I mean, if you have more, I'm not rushing you. If you want to share more, please go ahead.
Yeah. So the other piece is around workers and the economy, of course, where we've put together the People's COVID Recovery Agenda, which includes policies like the Essential Workers Protection Act. Now, this is a bill, a pretty comprehensive bill that allows for hazard pay for essential workers, gives them the ability to refuse dangerous work as well, ensures that they have proper protective equipment as well when they're working on the job, because currently in a lot of workplaces where people have to interface with the public or work in conditions where they have to work in person, they're not getting hazard pay or much protection at all. And so the Essential Workers Protection Act is a policy to make sure that this happens. We're pushing against evictions and a moratorium on foreclosures and evictions in the state. And along with that, even though this is probably a more long-term goal, we want to see policies like social housing and housing justice for all, and create more publicly owned housing stock to reduce the costs of living here in Maryland and put some more community ownership into housing.
By the way, shout out to the People's Army up there in Philadelphia and beyond, doing that takeover housing work. Check out the interview. Anyone who hadn't seen it, what we did with them yesterday, their approach to this issue is admirable as well.
Yeah.
So listen, I told you before we went on that I wanted to ask you about a project I'm trying to build from one of my classes to see if we can assist the work that you're doing, at least by way of assessing the messaging on these issues. So, one of the plans is to develop a simplified, assessment of the media ecology of starting with Baltimore, maybe Maryland. That is to find out particularly what Black residents are doing in terms of where they get their news, what they're listening to, what are they watching, to try to assess that. And then secondarily, to see what those spaces say or don't say about this particular issue of the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights. So whether it's about Leobor specifically or about, something related to police interaction with communities. So I just thought I would ask you for any input or thoughts that you might have as a representative of a group that we would hope could benefit from this kind of work. I don't know. Some of this is just off the top of the head, but like what kind? I don't know if there's particular terminology we should be looking for in the way it's discussed, or a particular frame in the way these issues are brought up, or not, to your experience, and then also just any thoughts from you on what Black Maryland residents are doing with their media, like where we'll have to try to recreate some of this or in terms of details, but where do you think, or what media outlets do you interact with or look for or struggle with even in terms of these issues and getting your perspective out? Anyway, some those are the sets of questions we're interested in.
Yeah. So in terms of those questions, so the media outlets that I feel most people wind up looking at, and I haven't done a study on this or anything like that, but
right, because that's what we're gonna do. That's what we're gonna do.
Well, I'm glad that you're doing it. Please let me know the results.
That's the game. That's the plan. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
From our organizing work, we see impact mostly with TV news, and I imagine in Baltimore you got Fox 45, WBAL, certain stations, and then from print media, of course, the Baltimore Sun, and then Baltimore, fortunately, unlike what we have in Prince George's, even though I would, of course, give a shout out to the Washington Informer, but among print media, we have far fewer independent outlets, or at least smaller, more organic outlets that cover certain things.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in Baltimore, now some of these like places, unfortunately, have like closed down, and I may mess up the names, but like the Baltimore Bee and like different smaller
Mm-hmm.
institutions like that, at least would take more of a people's perspective on certain issues, at least in my experience, right? Whereas when you're dealing with the Baltimore Sun, Fox 45, and some of the larger institutions, the biggest problem I would name that I've experienced at least is the lack of depth that they'll go into issues, if they will cover those things. Like, because they'll show up to a press conference about the law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights, or show up about to a rally or an action, but in some cases, like they have this medium of like about, what is it, like 3 minutes or a minute or so, probably less than that.
Less than that, yeah.
It feels like, where they just tell the basics of the story, whereas these issues are very nuanced and very, you have to understand the particulars of things in these issues, right? Like, for instance, the coverage around well, I don't know if there was much of any coverage around the amendments to the Law Enforcement Officers' Bill of Rights, but like, if it passes, the headline is just Maryland passes police reform, and then people get to look like heroes when they were in fact the villains, and this was not really in service to what the people were demanding in the first place. So media plays a part in that, because they don't necessarily dive in deeply into these issues, and part of it's the nature of, I guess, the landscape and what they have to cover. They got to cover every fire that happens, every shooting that happens, perhaps. But I think it's structural as well, and I don't think we can speak about this without mentioning Sinclair Broadcasting and the conservative effort to not only have their national platform in Fox News, but to insidiously weave their hands into local news, because I think there's a huge chunk of people that consume local, what they see as their local TV news. It's more trusted than probably, like, I think people are getting hip to the fact that national media can have different biases, perhaps, but they believe their local news anchor person is going to tell them just the facts of things. And now with networks like Sinclair and the broader corporate ownership,
Man, that is so messed up. I can't even front. Like, I was a couple of years ago, I was reached out to by a leading national nonprofit who claims its work is focused on making change for so-called people of color, to do a research project on Sinclair in Baltimore. Submitted a proposal, was accepted, developed a research project, developed the whole thing. And at the point of cutting the check, was told, well, actually wasn't told, I had to follow up on my own to find out why everything had gone quiet, that the project wasn't, going to go forward, and there was nothing going to happen. So I'm watching carefully, because should they ever try to move forward with that project without me, it's going to be, how did the shout out to the late great Bernie Mac, it's going to be some what do you say? It's going to be some trouble. but my point, really, that all aside, really my real point in bringing that up is that Sinclair has been known to be a problem for a long time in their reporting and their involvement in producing any media for anyone, much less a Black community in Baltimore, is kind of a scary thing. So they'll definitely be. We'll look into that as well, for sure. See that I just lost sight of my own next question. Oh, there it is. Good thing I take notes. when we talked to Lawrence Grand Prix a couple weeks ago from Leaders of a Beautiful Struggle, and he gave a great talk with us about his criticism of the way defund the police is talked about nationally in certain circles. One of the issues that he raised was that a lot of people who nationally want to organize around this for whatever their reasons don't communicate enough with the people in the communities on the ground to get their input in terms of what they want. So as it relates to this issue of the Law Enforcement Bill of Rights, has, I guess, for lack of a better way of putting it, has progressive Maryland dotted its I's and crossed its T's in terms of understanding what actual, Black residents in the community of Prince George's County in Maryland want? In other words, are there elements in the community that are saying, why are you looking to get rid of their Bill of Rights? Or why are you looking to threatening it when, I don't know, maybe there's an analysis from their point of view that suggests that a more protected police force is good for their own community or safety? Anyway, do you understand? Am I being clear?
That one. No, I understand what you're saying. I definitely haven't run into people rushing to protect the law enforcement officers' Bill of Rights. Most people, because what we do is organize, and I'll get into that in a second, right? But most people understand the basic idea that, in this country, at least, we may have a flawed one, but there's one Bill of Rights, essentially, and law enforcement police shouldn't get an extra one, especially when it relates to them abusing people. And so when we put it like that to people, they understand that this is just about fairness. And you can even talk to some of the most conservative people, I'll say, even conservative white folks, who say, no, I don't think they need extra rights to protect them. So people get that. But to the greater point, I agree with the folks from LBS on that, though I do support defunding the police. But a lot of what we have to struggle with in our movement is this, I would say it's not a real leftist orientation. It's a more liberal orientation that folks have that disconnects them from masses of working class people and actually engaging folks around these demands and having demands that are shaped by working class people, not just activists who, intellectually understand something or aspire to change something a certain way based on their theory, but being grounded in the communities of working class Black people, particularly, is hyper important, because then you have situations where there's a total disconnect between the movement demands and what people are experiencing and what people actually want. And I think that is a real struggle we have to have within our movement. The movement for Black Lives right now is to ground what we're doing always with working class Black people in the center. And I say working class Black folks specifically because it's working class Black folks that suffer the most under these systems. And sometimes they're not understanding us when we're talking about defund the police. You go to a community meeting and talk to some of the older Black folks that are at the civic association meeting. They are happy when Officer Friendly comes to the meeting and says, hey, here's my report on, that window that was broken on, Kennedy Street or something like that. They're engaging with that. So we have to be able to engage them and other elements of our community around what needs to be transformed and do the political education work that's necessary. What I'm for is moving resources away from policing and, of course, investing in other systems for safety and protection, but also for making sure that people still have safety in their communities, but it be more driven by and shaped by the people and accountable to the people in those communities. But there's a lot of organizing we have to do in political education. Because last point I'll say, because we also understand that there are still backwards elements in our communities who have been conditioned by white supremacist capitalist society to perhaps support the police without ever having to engage from a critical perspective with what that actually is producing in our communities. So we have to deal with all of that.
So listen, as always, we're coming up on an hour, so I just want to time check and make sure you're good. And if there's anything I haven't asked you to or led you to that you want to make sure you talk with us about, to invite that now, because my initial set of questions has been exhausted. So I just want to make sure that like I said, anything you all need to rap about or want to make sure we're clear on or elaborate on, please do. And I'll check here to see if I've missed any questions or comments for you to address.
Man, I just want to get you to talk to some of our folks in Prince George's County that think Black folks have made it, and break down some of the things in your book, because I was I forget what I was reading the other day. Thomas Sankara. I was reading one of his The Weapon of Theory. I had a friend recommend that to me, and in a piece of it, he talks about the bourgeoisie like classes of folks, and how at times like they'll operate in their own, what they believe their own interests are. And I think there's a total divide of that in Prince George's County, where we have our elected leaders, such as Senator Michael Jackson, that come more from that realm of thinking. In his case, specifically within the institution of policing, that are governing Prince George's County, whereas the poorer and more working class folks in Prince George's County are not seeing their interests represented in terms of local policy at all.
Well, obviously, I'd be honored. I'm always down to support whatever good work folks are doing. If I can be of help, let me know. I'm down to make it happen. Especially, and I would say, and I appreciate the nod to my book, but tomorrow, I believe, is when this paper drops, and whether it's me or the lead authors, we all have to be in touch with you and the organizations you work with, specifically around what we have in this paper that references PG directly. And I think some of the data that's in this paper and framed around some of the politics you and I both share, I think could be of great value, because first of all, one of the things I just noticed was that in PG included, and almost in the details will be in this paper, but in the top 10 counties, the top 10 richest Black counties in the country, more or less, the average house is only worth about $150,000. So when you talk about McMansions, obviously relative to some of the communities people have been gentrified out of, it's an improvement. But the idea that this is somehow a power base, an economic power base, is just not realistic. And then there's also interesting things I can't remember off the top of my head that are in this paper that are specific to PG, that one of my colleagues on the paper really did the details in dragging out. So maybe, I don't know if I don't honestly know what roles everyone in this process plays, or she would do the public discussion of it. But the point was that there's a specific and really isolated relationship in PG between the rates of Black-owned businesses and the revenues they generate, that has to do with a lot of it, I think, being supported by proximity to DC and federal backing. But then also that this is also one of the few places in the country where Black businesses that do exist have a Black consumer base that, relative to the rest of the country, actually can afford to shop there in substantive numbers. In other words, when you put those same black businesses in any other black community, they wouldn't be able to be supported as well. And only in this county in PG can they be supported to the extent that they are, because of that particular and very unusual relationship that black residents have to the federal government and the jobs there. Where in other parts of the country, black people are not supported in the private industry as they are in the public. Anyway, so PG is, my point is, I'm down. There's a lot of specifics to PG that I think even people that live there are not really clear on. And I'm down to help, and I would love to. So anything that can help with that, I'm down for.
And I just say this in relation to what you're saying there. This is something that my wife says, because her family, her wife, her grandmother, her grandmother comes from Jamaica, but immigrated to Flint, Michigan, soon after coming to the country. And the way my wife breaks it down is that Prince George's reminds her a lot of what she's at least seen and heard about Flint when it was a thriving, more so-called middle class black community because of the auto industry. Prince George's County, in a similar vein, like you're mentioning, is propped up by the federal government. I hate to knock any of my my family here in Prince George's County, but that is our industry that allows black folks to have more middle class jobs in DC city government and some of the ways that blacks were able to get into higher paying jobs, but it's still based on jobs and income from the federal government. But
it's all relative. They're not being paid the hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars that the real rich and wealthy people, particularly white people, have in other parts of the country. So it's only relative to the fact that black people are so horrifically poor everywhere else.
Exactly.
That what happens in PG looks good.
We're basic middle class, right? Like sometimes, and I grew up in this way. My father worked at Walter Reed for over 30 years and benefited from the Manpower program and affirmative action, and got a job at the federal government. So I benefited from this in my own life, right? But when those it wasn't wealthy, right? I grew up thinking, because I saw my other family members who did not benefit in that same way, right? I thought that we were rich. But then I look back and see what my parents were making. I'm like, nah, we were just scraping by, really.
Yeah.
It was a basic standard of living kind of thing. It was a good job, work HVAC and in the federal government, but it was not wealth. And that's not what's in Prince George's County. There's maybe a tiny fraction of black wealth, something you can call wealth, but usually it's people with good paychecks that want to go down to Mercedes-Benz and buy something in Prince George's County.
Yeah. Well, listen, Larry Stafford Jr., Progressive Maryland, thank you very much. I really appreciate you joining us and helping, selfishly helping me and my class put a project together, and we hope it will help your work. And certainly anything I can do with this platform and that BPM more generally can do, we're down to support. So just keep us in the loop, and we'll do what we can. Absolutely. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to have had the opportunity to talk to you.
Hey, the first of many, my man. So get used to it. Hope we don't wear out our welcome. But I appreciate
it. All right, cool, man. All right,
take care, Larry.
See you later.
All right, my man. All right, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. Again, thanks to Larry Stafford Jr. and Progressive Maryland and for the work that they're doing, and we will continue, of course, to support them. Please do, if you haven't already, like, subscribe, and consider joining. I definitely want to thank Freedom 1804 for becoming a new member. Thank you very much. We invite others to do the same as well. Plenty of room as we continue to look to expand and do so much more here at Black Power Media. So please keep the conversation going in the chat. I know I and my comrades at BPM do check the comments, and so please continue it there, and hit us up at blackpowermedia.org if you want to get involved or support or have any comments or questions. And of course, we'll catch you next time. And as always, as Fred Hampton used to say, to you, we say peace if you're willing to fight for it. So peace, everybody. Catch you in all of these whirlwinds, like Garvey and like Deruba and them said look for me in the whirlwind. Yeah, so look for us, because we'll see you out there as well. So peace, everybody. Catch you next time at I Mix What I Like Live. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.